Good morning. Today we're going to talk about a disease that illustrates a lot of what Megan presented and gave to you originally this morning. But first, I think I want to do a couple more introductions today because the week is flying away. His name and animal.
Ling Calcium, his name is Calcium.
Your animal?
Semje khare chendo des. La. Drepung. Or rabbit.
Why?
Khare chini. Because it's very humble and it does not harm other animals.
Okay.
Tubden Chumbe. Tile Chumbe. His name is Timle Chumpel.
Okay.
Chota, sorry. Timle.
We need a translator.
Timle Chota.
Okay. All right, great.
Simje. He wants to be a sheep.
Sheep.
Yeah.
Because?
Chunjin is Salonche. Because he has grown up with the sheep. So.
Okay. Next fellow.
His name is Gyatso.
Yes, nice to see you.
La. Kiptu. Kichunji Kiptu. Karinyate. Kiptu Radha Kichunji. He wants to be a pet dog.
Oh, pet dog.
A small one, like a puppy.
Uh-huh. Because they...
Karichini Nasek. He did not tell the reason.
Okay.
When asked, he's laughing. I don't know why. Because pet animals get better food.
You should go home with Megan.
But Megan the door is
Ice cream every day.
Give Megan the door is ice cream like rollers. Jamyang. He wants to be a sheep. His name is Jamyang. Jamyang Ra.
Jamila?
Jamyang.
Uh-huh. Jamyang. It's sheep because?
Karichin again. Look Ra. Karichin. He has grown up with a flock of sheep. That's why he likes sheep.
Okay.
La. Lobsang Gyatso. His name is Lobsang Gyatso. He likes snail.
Snail?
Yeah. Karchini. Chungdu. Because he used to play with snails when he was small.
What did he do with them?
Races? So he plays with those tentacles.
Oh,
he touched them and it goes back and again he touched them.
I like snails too. Okay, thank you.
His name is Dawa. He likes birds.
Birds.
Yeah. Because birds have wings and he wants to go back to his motherland in Tibet.
Yeah. How long ago did he leave?
Sorry?
How many years has he been?
18 years.
Okay.
Asam is his name. Karin Doeguling. Drepung. And he likes rabbits. Rabbits are simple animals and they eat grass.
Okay. We're going to start, I think. We'll do some more this afternoon. Thank you. So I was thinking yesterday when we were asking about if human beings are going to evolve into separate species, one of the debaters said that because you Americans are going to wall off America from everybody, that maybe this was how we might look in the future in America.
The Kranzo Tanda Kesa Hariga Doeguling Chorelana Nyeri Tanda me Nyeri the Nyeri Loga Chagres Lajura, Nyeri Sawaji Chagres and Dishi Kranzo Ari Latsiba Koroina, Ari Millions, Ari Miri the Loga Chaglan share Ross. Didn't it was Chagros?
And he's saying it's going to be a beautiful wall.
I'm calling it Karla Lana. Sigma the Ning Juji Chaglan Lavi rest.
Okay. To understand sickle cell anemia, you have to understand one of the kinds of cells that circulates in our blood. It's a red blood cell.
The Sorib Tabungi Nishi Juda, the Korshin Guinata, Tabung Kari, the Subuna, your Lawana, also that Tamar Tabung which had your rest.
I think all the slides, I've just changed the order mostly. This cell is very, very specialized.
The Tabung Judas, the mixage and rest.
It's packed full of a molecule called hemoglobin.
Dinala Dudul Jures, the Kang de rest, Dudul the Ming, the hemoglobin like rest.
Its job is to pick up oxygen in our lungs and take it to every tiny blood vessel all over our body.
Crying Ling, the Karich had your lawina, Solum Chazang Ling, and the Ngarazu Subuna, Tabung Kazu and the Samala Kuduche, Jura, Lit Lingin Chadures.
It's so specialized, it's gotten rid of everything except hemoglobin. There's no nucleus, there's no mitochondria, it's just like a bucket of hemoglobin.
The Nalo Latanazo, Nuget Hadul, and the Tening that the Kepujo Maristina and Career Lawnat and the hemoglobin decaying the rest.
And it's the perfect shape to do that. It's flat, so it's easy for the oxygen to come in and out.
These if country or Lana Lemoji rest, and the level in Zani, the Nalo Solum, the Lelo Chavi rest.
It has this depression in the middle that allows it to be flexible. It can bend a little bit if it needs to.
And Kila Tisch Kong the Dindis rest, the Yuzani Yamakuya Lelo rest Tabundi.
This shape is crucial for its ability to do its job. This shape is perfect for the job it has to do.
The Tabun the Koran Lingen Jura Lavachiwe, the Chego Durella, the Ibdi, and Tataji the rest.
So this is a cartoon. Cells are coming, red cells are coming out of our heart in a big tube called our aorta, going down to smaller and smaller tubes until they get to the tissue. And when they get to the very small, just a red blood cell can go through. And sometimes even it has to bend a little bit to fit to where it's going.
Tatanda di Gandhi Partunshares, Parza Mayura, Dine any Tanda Yinura, Ying Tadi, Tamatabun di Pardu rest, Taza, Parza Madini, and the Dinima Tazani to Dubala Kugu rest Tabundizo, and the Kuni to rest, Dinalani Tamatabun di Chibu rest.
And so this one is cut like this and looking at you, and this is its shape to be able to bend, and it's just full of hemoglobin.
The di Tandata Parzama Jura di Shasha Juru rest, Shawena the Tumura Kachedi, Diche and the Tamatabun di Chimbutun Shadu rest. And the Nanglo Karikang Durlana, hemoglobin dudul di King the rest.
They live about 90 days in our bloodstream, and then they get cleared out. They have no nucleus, they have no mitochondria, so over time, our body replaces them. This one would live about 3 months.
Tila duta di tabung di chashawena nima gubjus di yores tila du dausums chagures di tabung tama tabung di nanglola tening yo mare thana shi nuge thadu dige sama yo mares.
Next. So we did all this stuff yesterday about 3 things of the message make an amino acid, 3 things of the message make an amino acid. We tried to get that across a little bit yesterday.
Marazu kesa di tisa roas di ige sum dige entanda amino curchik sungu roas di nesudi di ige sum di nesudi ya amino curchik roas.
And this protein is the hemoglobin protein.
Ta di tikar jituen doas tize di kharelana hemoglobin tikar dire.
Actually, it's just the beginning of it, just the front piece.
Ta chazang yo mares di go di chiku res hemoglobin ge dudul di.
So you see here, GAG is the message that came from the nucleus before it didn't have a nucleus. So GAG is the message.
Ta tanda tening ne nesu le jora khoran la kharile orla na GAG dile res nesu.
And this is actually the 6th amino acid at the very front of the protein.
Dila duta amino cure tubo di chavores tubo la duta dundo thanda trigger di dundi chadores.
But there's a mutation that's changed it to GUG.
Ina dil gyurdo chi chinres gyurdo ji chinza di khari le gyurwa ratio ina GUG le gyurres.
You might remember from yesterday that sometimes this can change and it's not so important. But here's a change right in the middle of the messages amino acid.
Dila do igi sum yorwa sum digi neju digi amino cure chik chung yorwa. Dila do sumba di gyurwa ina shiraz kebar su muda kesa kera zo si imbas. Ina di thanda dinal khari gyurdo la na niwa di gyurres and kebar su yorres del.
Next slide. So we got to look at this, and there's what was GAG? That's what it's supposed to be. GAG, it makes an amino acid called glutamic acid.
Niela khari yor la ina ngazu amino cure di ta ina GAG roas. GAG imba ina amino cure khari yor la ina glutamic acid la di res glutamic cure di.
Sorry. But if you put in GUG, it's a whole different amino acid.
Ta digi tsabla kesi GUG chawa ina gyurwa. Dinde imba ina amino cure shimba ji chawi res.
That seems like not so important. It's just one amino acid out of 100 on the hemoglobin protein.
Ta dosta du gola ta gyara mangbu jora amino cure. Dinal chikran chik gyurwas. Digi kheba sumare samgurwas.
So in people who have this valine, something pretty amazing happens to their hemoglobin molecule.
Dila duta valine amino cure valine di yo ainas ta hemoglobin di thanda trigger jora dila ni mandaji chagi res.
Next, please. It becomes so distorted that it changes that beautiful little disc to something that looks like this.
Niela thangma thabung di dersu yora derib dosta derme yib dode di khare le jutu lana dende sorib chadu yores amino cure chigi.
In English, we call that a sickled cell. It looks like a sickle.
Honzo shinga lega chidu sora le yo digi yib do yores chesan di ming di tashire sorib lan.
So when it's trying to go to all those tiny arteries and capillaries down to the last little streams of blood that are giving you oxygen, it clogs up, it sticks.
Dila duta thanda pharza amani dugu yora deni ni pharza che thaksa thamu che thaksa chunju kha changmal dude thama delli roas dili du galata khuranju thanda sorib chen dim baina dela changma khar di yores.
Even if you have some normal cells that are not sickled, this can clog up to block blood flow down to the place it's trying to go.
Dila duta tha di pha yugu yoras di yug thu yo mares dela thanda sorib di ka shara thana shi yundeng gi thabung ji da thangma thung dile wa ne del ka di yores cheza tha de khuranju to sa sa ja de do thu yug thu yo mares.
This can happen, this ability, this to go to something like that happens, especially when a patient has the disease and is dehydrated or sick or stressed. It tends more to become this sickle.
Ta nebadila kisita semnye da dende yo ache ani nazapo aina ani khuranju gi thanda thangma thabung di an thanda dende ju di sorib chen chayu res.
So here's the sickled cell compared to some normal cells. So sickle cell, and some normal cells from someone's blood.
Ta dina cha sha na thangma thabung da an thana shi sorib thabung ni ga tyen she res.
This is just another slide of the same idea. Depending on how many of these are sickling, can have horrible consequences.
Dila duta thanda thangma thabung na ta na sorib chen khaju me di thanga mangnyu jora dila ta ne ani di tumde di li res ne badina.
People who have red cells that can keep their shape will write them that they're SS, they're normal.
Ta thanda thangma thabung yunde yimba ina sra khuranju gi thanda nganju gi rigze dupcha dita oina SS che ni di thi res.
Also, if they have one good hemoglobin and one sickling hemoglobin, where that sixth amino acid is changed, these cells are okay too.
Tanda dina cha shaw na ta rigze dupcha di ras di ani yunde di res thama thabu and di kharcha diolana thanda sorib chaish da diga jires dinde ni yo enas chik chik chai da dinde sorib ga ji yo ena kheba sugu yo mares mi di thangu yo res.
So that should make you think right away, given what Megan said, oh, this is a recessive disease.
Diladu ni di dinde yo ena ge mi dilana za kangi thigu yo mare la ro diladu ni ni Megan ge thio na chi khelo zo thingi ras dinde iman di naza di kharelana yipshi chenji ba habu doas.
If doesn't look different, but if you have two little s's, you have the full-blown disease. All your cells are like this.
Ta kesi rigze dupcha s ta oina niga ele niga chunju yimba inas ani naza thanda surib thabung di chagi yores di kangi di thigi yores,
Especially when running a fever, especially in times of stress.
ani semnge da dinde kangi thigi da chawa bar chi du galani di kangi di thigi yores.
So what happens when this starts to occur?
Ta di naza di chunga gapsu khari khari chagi yome di ni shegi yesma.
The organ that takes old blood cells out of circulation and recycles the hemoglobin to make new red blood cells is called the spleen. It's sitting over here behind your stomach.
Ta thanda ngajo thama thabung de jo ta ma thuju ye du gal khora changma sungi jora di khari cha diolana thanda ngajo po e gyabla ani di jores ongbo jores til spleen la jores.
The spleen is overworked to try to get rid of these bad cells.
Ta di kurang gi lega mangbo shu ji chigores khari chigorlana tha mogo de jo ma tungi ros thabung de jo.
And it can be very severely injured from people with this disease.
Ta naza dende yungi ri ju da dende indu gala di ongbo de lega mangbo shu ji chini thang che ro ji cha di res lega mang thani che.
The disease is called sickle cell anemia because in general they have fewer red cells than normal people would because of this destructive property.
Ta di kangi di thigi yo chan neba denju rignal khari ro la na namju gyundeng gi thama thabung di nyu ai res.
The hemoglobin in the red cells actually then gets sometimes free in the blood and the patient gets jaundiced where their whites of their eyes becomes very yellow.
Dilo du dende kangi thidu gala ani neba denju na khari chagi la na mik thanda ngajo kau ji do di khari chagi la na seu chagi res. Jaundice nazar thiba nazar sta di li ros.
But the jaundice isn't so bad. This is what's really bad. As you can see, these are little children. This is the guy's thumb. Incredible swelling of the joint, of the parts of your body where the flow is going to be the most vulnerable to clogging up.
Dilo du ta thanda thiba dida kangi shiras mares dilo duroina ta di pugu chunju chi kangba resra thanda di sorip thabung yo kangi jua tha gagdo di thanda cha sha na di kangba do ne do cha yo ras de la ga di yo res che jang kangba tang yo res.
So the feet and the fingers can get a little cold, the blood vessels in there squeeze down, and these cells really clog up these appendages, these digits.
Dila du subu gi ne do cha yo ra da subu da thanda kangba de zo de ri la an thanda tha de zo changma thabung den sama ga ni ani tai kangi thi yo res.
When a person who, as we know, has sickle cell disease is having symptoms like this, we say they're in crisis.
Ta kangi shu the gal di ke je shi yo res na za den de ta ne da den de tyo inas.
Besides leading to possible permanent injury to these fingers and arms and legs, it's incredibly painful. These patients have terrible problems with pain. Pain.
Ta thanda nebe den de rik ji do ta tha gawa cham ma se ani nasu shu tang yo res me gyon do shor ani nasu shu ta ni neba den ju kangi shu thi yo res tigeri de.
They also get many infections, and they generally, where I first trained, we had many patients with this disease because we had many patients of African descent, and I'll tell you why that is in a minute.
Ta nebo den de rik thanda African ni yo den de na manga yo res ra miri din juna ani di kangi di ho ta shuk chum shu thi du nasu den de ta kangi shu thi yo res kran jo na lo.
They were very thin, their extremities looked terrible, and they were always in pain when they came to the hospital.
Ta menga la neba digi rigli du khande la na supu kambu che kangba de laba den sama tang dinge an nasu shu yunge den de neba li dos.
So people get this disease from a mosquito that's carrying a parasite.
Ta den de neba do cha sha na chik na za chi khari la na tan da thukdang ju ras tukjang dinine ni thanda shinden socha dikhin yungu res tukjang di naza khingi.
Oh, yeah. So this, I'm sorry. This is the disease called, this is the disease called malaria, which is, we talked about sickle cell disease as a disease. Now we're going to talk about another whole disease called malaria.
Thangingwa la share di nganzu sorip thabungi naza jura di sheres ta thanda di naza shemba res di naza di min khar lana malaria res.
This disease called malaria is transmitted to humans by a mosquito that bites it.
Ta di naza di mila khandis ligyor la na tukjang gi gyuni ligyor res tukjang di so jaban naza di pel gyor res.
The female mosquito is infected with a little parasite that goes to her salivary glands, and then she bites a person and it goes into him.
Ta thanda di rocha shawana tukjang po moyora modi res modi sugunan kharile dorla na shinde socha dile res an di thanda ngazu gi membu yora chime membu di tamla le ani so jayo kapso ani di shinde socha nebu jora di ma tugu res mi suguna.
Okay, next is great. So this is another slide of the life cycle. The mosquito bites us. It gets into our bloodstream, goes all through our body, and multiplies.
Tadi tukjang ni gochu gi res ra tukjang di so jay de so jay res so jasa jala thana yu res de ne budi andi thanda socha di kwali lana subu chasan na tham du res.
Now it's in our blood. A new mosquito bites and picks up the disease and can give it to the next person.
Ta subu di nan yore la ra na za ne budi di ani tukjang gi so jay res ya tukjang so jasa jala ya bish bachile thangbu ji so jan na za din shin koro jay res.
We find malaria in this part of the world, warm and wet usually.
The malaria nazash do zamli na taw na saragala hol urlo na sajati cha yu sa da lunshir che rijura de la yures. The maul ta ga shugitures.
They estimate over 1 million people perhaps die of malaria each year.
Lor rirena la misa ro shiur lan tan malaria nazash do di kengi misa shiur lan shiures.
So this year it was very bad. Almost 1.25 million people died.
Ta thanda di ro cha shoina ani sa chik ni ta shija chik sto ji ta thong yures dina.
The majority of those who die are children under 5.
Mang cha ta du gala kharita derlana kharicha derlana thonge de rong chingi de jo longan menju jura longan men di cha dures.
And the darker the color, the higher the number of people that are dying.
Ta dina la khado khagas ki khara duyo na ra digas ki mi manga thonga tingu res atana.
So that's malaria.
Di malaria naza di ko res.
This is where the sickle cell anemia gene occurs.
Ta thanda sorir thabungi thanda rigje jura di kho yume di ani satana tyen res.
The darker the color, the more common you see that mistake in the hemoglobin molecule.
Ta thanda ngazo hemoglobin tiga jura dina la nindu shogyo cha de ro sorir thabung la na di kho yume dina la khagas ki khara te ani digas ki manga res.
So let's put those side by side. And you can start to see that this allele, this bad kind of hemoglobin, is more common where malaria is more common.
Ta thanda dini endes nyam du shani ta wai nasra thanda sorib thabu yungi gi naza jura di ani khawal thoy yor lo na malaria yosa saja jura dina manga res.
This is just within Africa where it's the most. The darker the color, the higher the frequency, and the darker the color, the more the malaria.
Dile du thanda dina ta wai na khado khagas ki khare na digas ki tuju che res dijuna ta wai na khagas ki khare na dina la malaria manga res lan te res.
What scientists have discovered is quite remarkable. To have a copy of the sickle cell, the bad hemoglobin, protects you from malaria.
Ta thanda seriba chi khare shigur la wai na thanda sorib thabung ni naza jura di kangi ma thegu na ani thanda malaria ni sungyop chi lagyo res.
You may still have the disease, but you won't die, or you may have much more mild symptoms.
Dile du naza thanda sorib thabung naza jura naza di yo ai nas kiran la the neda den jutis nyunga res nyanga shira syuma res.
One paper I looked at last night said it's about 90% protective from getting severely ill with malaria.
Dilodo kashi malaria naza shu yo enege Quran zu gaja gubju shi sungyop chi yo adityo res ke shogushina.
So remember, if you have just one allele, just one bad copy hemoglobin, it doesn't hurt you.
Ta allele chigran chig yo ainas an keran nugyun ke chi yo mares.
In fact, it'll protect you from dying from this very prevalent disease in certain parts of the country, malaria.
Chezan di allele chig yo aina malaria ni sungyop ya ga yorlan shi yo res di allele chig dio ana surip tabongi.
I'm from Seattle. There's a famous guy there, Bill Gates, who has a foundation. And one of his major sources of giving money is to try to get rid of malaria.
Ta tanda ngara Seattle la saja dis dina tanda Bill Gates ki thepsa yo resra ang Quran gi ta laga chi khari chi yo la na saja din zo la romute ni malaria method che jora ko ay di thapji chi yo res.
So he's tried to find some very practical ways that'll work in these very poor countries in Africa.
Ta Quran gi thablam ya bu indi che res ta tanda Africa gi saja nan saja kyo indi mangbu jora dil ro ko che.
Some of them are mechanical things like passing out mosquito netting to infected villages.
Ta robo chiyor tabla mangbu yor do tablam chi khari yor la na anzo thugdang gi bugur rig jua tinde matam gi res thongse tin zo na.
Another possibility is to spray with chemicals that will kill the mosquito.
Ani tablam chi khari chiyor la na ze din zo ni ani thugdang se jora di chi res.
But mosquitoes can evolve too, and they evolve resistance to some of these insecticides.
Thana shi bume to roina ge ta thugdang na rig mangbu yor was di na lo khashi khari yor la na di koai gi ni ba yongi yor res din zo rig khage yor res din zo phejur chini.
I don't know if you can see it, but some of these areas, the mosquito has already become resistant to the main drug that they've been spraying with.
Ta thanda me bume tor ko yor la ra di tor du gala de thugdang khashel ha yor res lan shera di phejur chini. Din zo thanda koshu chen thida din de indu gala thanda ta mau ja jo din zo ha wa din zo tin yor res.
So the ones that are red are already resistant in these different species of strains of mosquitoes.
Ta thanda ta mau ja sha jo dos di thanda thugdang ha wa thanda di to koshu chen inge gi thugdang ri din zo cha de res. Di la de thugdang gi rig min do di res wal ta mang bush ke shu do ming din zo.
And you might guess they've really been spraying right here in Ghana or Benin or somewhere up in this part of Western Africa, I guess.
Ta thanda de la ze to ro ine ge mang bush yu jil ha de dos dinang la rig mang bush la res.
Whereas the green, they're still susceptible to that drug that can kill the mosquito.
Ta jangu rig den zo khari la na ze to ro na shiru res thugdang rig dige.
So people with sickle cell with a sickle allele are selected for because they can survive malaria, which is always there.
Ta thanda surip thabung rig juda tinde yingi yu bai nas tezu dam shagi ro chagi res kana na malaria gi khe kangi tigi yu maris tige rigla.
And mosquitoes are becoming resistant to the insecticides that we're trying to use to kill them.
Thana shi bunal ta wai nas thugdang ta wai na Quran zo thume to ro in bai nas dinal gorshu che in ba din zo ha dige res.
So this slide wants to say that evolution is all around us on the people and on the mosquitoes that we're trying to eradicate.
Thana shi ta thanda phelgur la jora di khawai na changmana thoya res thanda di cha shawa na mi gi thanda mibur na she res chi khari na pezin shalan thanda thugdang na sha res.
Okay. So this question asks, how is it possible for a mutation to not cause harm to somebody who has a mutation, like someone with sickle cell? First idea. Okay. Go ahead.
Di tuwa di isa ni yur ke kede shila ne mi ke wa chidar yong si tam chida di tuwa di is.
It can change the protein. It can change the protein, but the protein still works fine.
Di khari juwa tangi ur lawa na tamghar do tambodi trigger la juwa tangi res ina trigger di Quran lega khari chiyo di tawta chiyo res juwa tangwai ne.
It doesn't cause any change in the protein. It's just a mutation that didn't affect the protein.
De ani niba di khari shalana di tize la ani juwa tangi yo ma res lani.
Or the mutation causes a change that's good for you.
An thanda ni jur ji chungwa ra di khiran la pengi yo res.
Or all of them.
Ani ana ye ne she jo di samma de res la jora di res.
Who votes A?
Ta dinal dam la ra thuwa di ta lendi khandi e re lange khazu yes. Nijulana thanda jua dre jua dila rizela DNA la jua dre jura mutation le jurdo dre jua DNA dila di gurdo dro na ni dila ke me khandes king mares lan dirido.
Karma, we're going to have a series of little questions like this. Why don't they break up into groups and discuss one at a time, and then someone will give us an answer?
The Kiranzu Tanda de Tuachik do, Dendo Tandu Tuahashi Juice di Jella. In Kiranzu Ruba Nala di Chua in Alas, and Kiranzuri, Tudurche, any lane dire law in us.
There's like 3 or 4 questions coming up. They're out of order from your slides, but they're coming up. So this will be the first question. It'll be on the board. Okay. I hope in your groups you've reached an agreement as to what your group thinks the answer to this first question is. So let's try someone from each group say what you think is the right answer. How about, why don't we start in the back sometime? Maybe right in the middle on the left side, that group.
Oh, Tanda di Tuachik do, di ma lane di Damkar do, di Karan Zurugana, Tudurchini Damsa Yugires. Ra, the lane di any Ruba Rene, the lane Kari Medi, any Tanda Rechini Dwayins Ra, and Tambo Gam goes to Wins.
So just ask some group in the middle.
Key Rojini goes to Gos. B is the right answer.
Was it B or D?
B, I think it was, which one, B or D?
B.
B.
Nibadi Ra B.
Abs, there's no question if you don't change the protein, you won't change its function. That's true. Anyone else have another answer?
Res, Tizi la Jua Maduna and the Chele la Jua Dumaras, the Lane di Tata Res, and Shimba? A is the right answer.
It can change the protein, but that still functions normally. That also is absolutely true.
Res, Kana di Tigger la Jua Tang Yurde, in a Tigger di Koran Chele Karicho, the Gunde Chede Res, Dia Demba Res.
Does anyone vote for C, that a mutation can be beneficial?
Dila de C re lange US, di Tanda Nijur di Gen Pento Res, Pento Josh Tang. Okay, their answer is C.
Yeah, so then if we think A, B, and C are all possible, then the answer, I hope you understand, is D. Those are all true.
The C di Demba Res la Ra. The lane A, B, C, Sumja Demba Lana, that lane the Tongudos, D la Dugola Consul, some Demba Reslan Sheras.
In America, we give tests like this all the time. And sometimes it's 2 and 4 are right, 1 and 3 are right, all, you know, and it's the teacher just tries to trick them up with the combinations of answers. But in this case, it's just they're all true.
Dila Duda Tanda Dina Chashoina, Consul Sama Demba Res Lajura, Lane, Chagio Reslan, Dichares, Angazo Arido Chasho and Tua Dende Tangres, Eda, Tambo the Sumbani dig the Rena, Niwa the Sumbani dig the Erland, Dende Damkati Res, Dita Tugud Pud and Zula Gonyoto Switch had the rest the Tuade.
So you've seen that when that third base changes in the message that goes out to the cell, it won't even change the protein. It could change the protein, but it doesn't matter. It could change the protein, and it's good for you. Go ahead. There's somebody talking.
Dila Tanda Dido Chagio Rasa, Dinala base Sumira, Pisungi Yasumia, the Sumba del Guatawana, Tiger Ranja de Sirayana, Sumba de Guatawana, Tiger Joganage, Chile Tata Rancha, Gunde, Chile Harit Tuba, the Ranja to the Resland, the Chavio Res. So you said all the above three sentences are right. So I feel that A and B are somewhat not true.
Let me see. I have to look on the translation what A and B are.
A da B ni ta me just ke wa thong sung la A da B. So I feel these two are in contradiction, A and B. And the first one says it changes the protein, and the second one says it do not change the protein. So these two are in contradiction.
But you can see when we've talked about animals responding to their environment and being able to survive over the course of that's the idea of evolution, that those changes were beneficial for that population in that environment.
Dila duta chone chetunge gi thanda chogdu nalta wana kenga khashi ji setu yorla dugala I chone chetunge dezo thanda khori khoran zo nalola thanda kheda jora di ani khoran zo kheben yo atungi yorwas.
I think you're right though. In English the word mutation implies, it's not true in this how we're teaching here, but it implies something bad.
Ta thanda inji nalta wana thange mutation la jdo ani jur la di khale roju khugur la na chik duga roje la khugu yores.
If it was good, we'd start calling it a good allele.
Ta yaga ena anzo khari lagirla na allele yawa lagires.
But the idea is the same. It's a change at the DNA level that leads to a change in the protein that could be beneficial. So certainly the A and B are true, but C is also correct.
Ta nyejur la di khari la na ko khari ligur la na jor roje lagires. Dila dita thanda dinata wana A da B C changma temba cha deures.
There are some mutations, you can get a mutation in different spots in the protein, and mutations in one spot might have no effect or even help the protein function better, whereas mutations in a different spot in that same protein could ruin its function.
Dila du tigar chig ra imba ne thanda nyejur dre jora jor dre di ne chigla draw inas digi tigar dil kheben yu sigres ya ne shemba jil yo ina tigar dil nogen chi sigres.
That's often true when a protein has to fit into a tight structure, and there's physical constraints on how that protein's twisted or flat or coiled. Some proteins are coiled, some are like sheets, like pleated sheets we call them. Some have very specific shapes for their jobs, and that's where some of these big mutations can be important.
Dila duta gyurdosh da thanda nyejur di khechimbu chagures khainan tigar khoran so chele loga loga du khashi khari na na leble che chigan chik chek shagyo yo khashi khari chu di joda dinde yores dila du gyurdo gi khashi gi phengi yores dinde rigla.
So now in groups, the next question.
Ta ya tiwani ba dis.
Instead of Mendel and his peas, we're going to have two parents come together. They came from Africa. They survived malaria because they're both sickle trait.
Ta thanda ngola Mendel gi ngonso senjang gal tarwas ta thanda di khari lana phamani yores khurani khari lana Africa ni le yores Africa ni le di khurani la kheda khari lana thanda surip thapung yungi kheda di yores ni gana.
So they moved from Africa to Seattle.
Africa ni ani ari Seattle la le res khurani.
And each one carried a good copy of hemoglobin and the sickling hemoglobin.
Ta phamani yora niga la khari lana ta waina alil s chewaji da yaga drodi andi thanda surip thapung kingi dra diniga yores.
So here's the woman, here's the man. He's the exact same kind of alleles.
Ta alil ta waina di amadi chadora modres di podres alil niga chikwaji gyang khidores niga.
They're thinking of starting a family.
Ta khurani nangmi gochue res.
You're the doctor in charge of the genetics clinic.
Ta kherang kharir lana member ji res rigze khewayo da dinde member ji chadu res rigze da de.
They each know that they have these two alleles.
Khurani ga khari ha kugur lawana khurani la alil khari yo di s church da chunga jo khurani pala da amla di ha kugur res.
They come to you as the doctor, say, "Doctor, what's the chance of my baby having sickle cell disease, of being SS?"
Ta khurani ge member la khari thiyo re lana ta ngarani pu chunga na pu dila thanda naza jora s chunga ni di ani khar ta waina khaga sures kya cha pa baina khande sures lani member la ke thires.
So maybe work on that for a little bit, and we'll see what we come up with.
Ta di ani khari yume dikhiran zo ta digal chegu ta je chiro chis di. 지단 신주라스 주시셔야지 디탄 애니 간주 dumde 가르쳐 부르다고스
You could do in groups if you like. That's fine.
로가나 지나 디기 레스티 최고디 라 직 숨다직 숨 당보직 내봐 so they said it's 25:3:1 ratio
So what is the chance that that first baby has sickle cell disease?
딜라도다 부고 당보주라 딜 아니 탄다 수립 타봉 용이 나자디 용이 계좌 가질 수 있어스
1 in 10, 50-50?
계좌 합주래 간데 레스 there is no child with sickle cell disease
There's no chance.
there's no chance
Okay, so let's say this little sperm with the little s, he has a little s. And here's the egg with the little s. And here's her thing, and she's just got a little s too. If this sperm meets this egg, what's the genotype of that baby?
the come cow dura pane dila s chunju diores ani di magi gonga dress di s chunju dingi teo na puguji chungruas pugudi rigze chupcha hande juores chungani both as small as
Too small s. That means that every molecule of hemoglobin in that baby has the sickle cell disease.
dila du pugudi ta subuna tawna ni thangma thabuna hemoglobin jura dita du wala ni samala sorip thabun di chadu ros
Let's just do the other ones. If this sperm meets this egg,
come cow dida ni gonga di yam do deoinas dili chag ros
not only will this baby not have the disease, it'll put an end to this little allele being passed on.
dila du ta di naza yo mares di jibu maiba thanda naza khingi gi elil jura dia jam shagi ros pugudi ma tangai me chag res riguna
That would be good. In Seattle, there's no point in having big S, little s. There's no malaria.
di yabu rasta dende raoina ani Seattle nana kheba ke suyo mares di ne yaga res malaria naza de medu kheba yo mares di yume
So you could put an end to that disease in this family if all your babies came out like this.
dila du ta ari lale soyjela naza di yo maras malaria di dende yimba ina kheben che res
If this sperm meets this egg, the child does not have sickle cell disease.
ta thanda s di da kham kaw ni ani gonga s di ni deoina puguji chungruas dila ani naza yo mares
It'll be just as healthy as its brother or sister.
Quran thangde khaga swerlana jojo da aja khari on pinja jora chibuji gyan yores thangde
But this person is a carrier for the disease again.
ine naza di khengi ji cha dores Quran nagi yo mar de naza di khengi cha dores
And when she wants to get married, he or she wants to get married to another person of African descent, they might go through this whole testing thing again.
dilo duta di kisi Quran Africa meeting do message yam do chansa gya yim bainas phuda pumusuina and di thanda yan taje che jura di ranja tu yores
You wouldn't tell by looking at this baby, oh, it's got a little s. You'd have to have it tested.
ta pugu di ta wajam gi ngajo she tu maras dila elil s chunga di dulani dingajo taje che bu yores dila
And the fourth possibility of a little s and a big S is just the same. These are the same, they came from different parents, but these are the same genotype and phenotype.
dila duta dila ye chiba chai ras s chunga da che jures di phada ma le dang lo le te ine rigze tupcha ta ina chiba jigyan res
So these three are all healthy, but these two could carry the disease on in society.
ta disum khari cha de lana thangbu res pu din le ke oina ina dini khari cha de lana naza khege di cha de res
If I saw a young woman coming into my clinic worried about sickle cell disease who was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, I'd say not to worry.
ta kemi ji ta siu che mingom bu yimba na sra di nge menga le le oina ni dis thanda surip thabu nge di de naza di wana nge semde chibu mari le res
All her ancestors came from a country, Norway, no sickle disease and no malaria.
ta khorangi mebo ta oina khawni le jol lana norway ni le shawj res dila du khoran zola ani thanda di surip thabu nge naza di yo mares thana shi ani malaria naza di yo mares
The incidence of this sickle trait, the incidence of this sickle allele in Europeans is 1 in about 58,000 people has it if your skin is white.
다 샴도 카라리 주다 디타와나 미 다 유럽도 나타와나 가즈올라와나 마치 게동네 찍날 통해 레스티 강에디.
In my country, someone who's African American, who has some African heritage, the incidence of that allele, of this small s, is more than 1 in 400. It's 1 in 370 or something like that.
다 단다 가오다 나 미리 디도 딘데 데모나 타와나 디 SS to your study Kazuni Lawana, Sumjanga choose Shibjasni any chicks then the Tungu res.
So these two are carriers for the disease. But you would never know by looking at them. This one is healthy and won't carry the disease from her, let's call these all her, to any of her offspring.
Diladugala di pumu khandi jorlana thangbo yores ani pu khandi jikyo ane thangbo kigres nazad yo mares.
And this one has the full-blown disease.
Ta dio aina nazak yungi chad yores dinde dojkyo aina.
Now when this woman wants to marry in 20 years and she has a boyfriend who's an African American, we don't know if he's big S or little s, so the disease may come up again in her family from his ancestry.
Ta thanda di changsa gaya imbainas pomudi ta changsa gesa miri nabush to dinde imbainas and di nazat kingi yisigi rasla tu mares.
So for these recessive alleles, you can't see them by looking at the person.
Chesa midi ta tawachamgi thanda yipshishingi elil di yume hagu mares.
Unless both chromosomes have that allele.
Ta elil nije thanda chromosome na yuye niga thara imbaina ani kheda ditungu yores.
Okay, it's just like Gregor Mendel and his piece, same thing.
Thanda di drodang ye ni Mendel da khorangi sema jangul taji chimba di chibuchi kyan resti.
Although there you were following a dominant allele, this is like the healthy S is dominant.
Ta thanda paginal ta du bala ngushi chen len yorwas thanda dina ngushi chen khari cha dorlana S chho di res.
Okay, one more question. True or not, a mutation always causes harm to a person.
Ta thanda gurdo dwa jora di ani kengoi del khadu na no ki res lan di demba re no res. False.
Yeah, we already went through that in the previous question.
Ni tiwa di na len di gasa rolesta.
And I tend in my own speech, if it's good for you, I almost don't call it a mutation, but that's just a problem for me. That's not correct.
Ta ngaran ro cha sha na ngi khandi ro ji phejo chigyo lo na thanda nyegyur lan jubdosh da duga rang la phejo chigyo es di ta da digyo mares nyegyur la ya duga niga yungu res.
Right, so now we need a favor from you all.
Ta kenan suni chi rebu jiyes rewaji shuyes.
And we're going to make work for our friend Gellick.
Ani gengele ge nyam de la chibu gu restina.
I'd like each one of you, before you go, to consider what we've been talking about. Write down an area or a question or something we said that might be interesting that you'd like to know more about. That's one thing I would like to know more about, and put in a topic.
Ta tharing khari she me che ani thana shi jangyo na ni khiran zu ni thiwa indile na khari khari me di ma thiro chisra.
So something new that maybe we'll know something about.
Thana shi khiran zu ita di shendu du la wa na ra ngaran zu ha ma ko ngi na ngara zu shen du ras nyam do.
And then the other thing, I would like further explanation about something we covered in class. So you say, I'd like further explanation about Mendel, or I'd like further explanation about alleles or about DNA. Please write those two things down, and then we're going to ask Gellick to let us know what we're going to talk about in the next couple of days.
And the two keranzul khari shud lana ta thanda badu jangera jangyo na ni ta keranzu gi Mendel kor la thandi manga shindu dula waina di thiro chis thana shi DNA kor la shindu thandi jindan thiwala has thandi shindu dula waina di thiro chis yana allele kor la shindu dula waina ya di thiro chis ni gang thiro chis.
I think someone. While we're finishing up, does anyone have any questions about this morning's material?
Ta tharing shuge jinda thiora Di nanglo le kenan zumeni tiwa US. Taring zendadi. So, what is the relationship between mutation in DNA and natural selection? What is the relationship between these two?
That's almost the mechanism. Something has to act on an inheritable molecule to pass it on to next generation. That's mutations in DNA are the mechanism.
Pegyur shedu chigni mat gyudong chedi shiyo ras di cherim ro cha de res cherim di and di tanda ngzo DNA na gyo do na chigni mat gyuzar la tangyo ras di cherim ro cha de res. So how is the change in DNA? How does it happen? Kandis chayo res ra gyudo de. The lower to the Ning to Bejura, the contest to res laurada. So there are specialized organs like hearts and lungs. So how come these like cells change and form different organs?
That's not a mutation. It's not like my toe mutated to become my heart.
Dila du thanda gyuwa do ning chaya da loa chaya jura di ani gyurdo na chigi yo mares di thanda nganzo di da zubje na yo thabung di ani ning chara le jura di gyurdo inde ke shi yo mares.
All the DNA is the same, but what genes are made and are allowed, what genes make specific proteins are quite different between my head and my liver.
Thanda khari kheba dugur law na rigze khari gi ani thanda ngajo liver na cha sha na rigze khari ki wangbo khari dugu me jura di ani wangbo loga kheba dugur res.
Just like we said, we don't want our muscle cell to be making the same proteins that are like acid to hurt your to chew up your food. We don't want that in our muscle to chew up our muscle. Different cells make the different. Everything is in all cells. The blueprint's in all cells, but different tissues just choose to express some genes, not all genes.
The DNA ta ina chikpa chikya yores. Ina thabung re so chele loga yoras. Dila duga pe sha ina shani thabung ina trigger shani dube trigger tungu ras. Di rigi rigze disegi yores. Thana shitang aju po na ta ina gyur tungi gi da trizin di thabung de cha yoras. Dinde ring aju shani na bugu yo maras di chele goro du bugu ma di rigze sedang loga cha yores.
The cell that's going to be a red cell.
Kandis ale di tangjin chinge de. So whether what genes are so the heart this genes needs to be expressed. Who is controlling it? What is controlling this process?
The DNA that makes a protein might be this much of DNA. Go ahead.
The trigger swing do cha cha na DNA na digas chimba cha cha na sa chejum.
But the DNA around it that doesn't make a protein has the controlling switches.
Dila do ta korangi swing digas yores. The swing mai ba tangjin chinge jora switch do hanju par se chinge jora di khoar lan di thala yores.
So it's like a play or a ballet where some things control the movement of everything else down to make that tissue.
Dila do ta pungdup durela mangbu chinyam do ruru chini lega chidinge roji chagyo res chik di gochu an pha bue jora di mangbu chinyam do duni lega chigyo res.
Next year you'll learn all about promoters, introns, exons, all the details of what you would like to know right now.
Dila do thanda kheran zo shende doaslas khandis di trigger khandis tu gu me lai di khari kho du gu me lai jora di ani sangma kheran zo lo jema shing res di na lo intron la the exon la the promoter la mangbush li res channel di sama la chi dan di ni lo jema shing res.
The red cell on its way to becoming a red cell, the only gene it's using is hemoglobin to fill it up.
The Tama Tabung do Chachawana, Dinal Kariguerlana, Rixe Kanangazo, Tama Tabuna hemoglobin guguras, Chesan gene Rixe Tara and hemoglobin sudigures.
Before it spit out the nucleus, it wasn't using any of the DNA except that bit.
Tamboda Tining ni Tunza Jalan Tanda di Kurangi Karirang Pejuchurlana, Chunju di Chikurang Pejuchigures, Tama Tabuna.
And that's how it's become such a special cell.
Chesan di Tabung the any mixed Tabung Chadigures.
That red blood cell is born in your bones, and it goes through stages to become a red blood cell.
The Tama Tabung Tambo Kesa di Rubanaki Ures, and the Nikali Kali and Tama Tabung Chagures. So how come, again he is asking, how come these organs are differentiated, they become specialized? What is controlling it?
Okay, so that happens during development, and it's pretty complicated. But okay, take one step back first.
That's how long cheer cup so that the Kijashi rest or dandi. That and the Kombachik Mapeo in Astranja.
So if our DNA is like our cookbook, all the cells in our body have that cookbook.
Tangazo says Sueni and Pesu Shine Bas, Kala Suedi. The Suegi did some call it Lana Tebjina Ures, the DNA do Chashasra.
But different cells copy different recipes, take them to the kitchen, and make different food, different proteins.
Cheza ani tabung loa kharchigurlana susu se khala khari suguguna digi sudang jura dichibu leni ani shobu dikini tabjana dugures.
Some of those proteins are in charge of deciding which recipes get copied and taken to the kitchen.
Ani khashi tangji chingi khari chadurlana tigar chadures khandi lembugu dos tabjana duya da shole jura dame dichik tigar khashi tangji chigures.
Those proteins, we call them regulators. They can change one cell type into a different cell type.
The tiger denzolanzo chojin chege lagi res regulator lang di kharchulan tiger reaching reaction ba res.
So if we take regulators from, say, brain cells and put them in to skin cells, we can turn those skin cells into brain cells because our regulators will turn on the right recipes and start making brain cell proteins.
Dila do chojin chege tiger jora di tangzo lebana yo chojin chege di kesi ngzo pakpe thabuna luainas ko chojin chege za thanang ngzo gi DNA gi thanda thep do jora dine ni leni khari dashu chirlana lebe thabung lebe gi tiger suires.
As the fertilized egg goes through development, the initial regulators come from the egg, come from the mom. They were made while in the mom, and they start that process.
The chojin chege thangbo jora di khane ni chungorlana mani chungures dine ni gurim di kotsugures.
And then as the fertilized egg develops into more cells in a baby, to turn it from the starting cell type into different cell types, the regulators will turn some regulators on in this cell and not in that cell.
Ta thanda chojin chege thangbo jora di an thanda thabung chig ni mangro dura di tudugalani thabung khashe na la di chojin chege di ani par che jora par se che di par thabung shemba na la par gyo bhares chojin chege di.
And that's how we get all the different cells in our body, by turning the regulators on and off, who then decide what recipes to copy.
Cheza chojin chege di par se che jora di la tene an ngazo thabung loga mixe chen chadu res.
Does that make more sense? It's a difficult question. Scientists are still working on it a lot.
Good questions that are hard for even the best scientists to answer exactly. Because you can always go back one step. What caused this? What caused this? You can always do that.
Tiwa di kabu cha diores ta seriba khewa din zulai tiwa inege ta di ke chinge dire yan di ke chinge dire lan ma chi lo de or ki wrestling de.
So those are great questions.
Tiwa ya bu dos din zo.
Ni toa jiga. Ni toa ke khare resna tanda malaria nada chido.
Khari malaria.
Ke nada ke khare stengi chil njo de la ji tidong di so jaba ina. Khol mi se ta toa di de de jo.
Khari yugen la
이 치료 이 주라. 저제 때는 뭐 소자바이나 고비스 소아들이 되고. 당이 딜 사도를 받을 기 소자바이나 디 강사들 비스 소아들이 되고. 그래서 간지.
Sorodi. So, if the Anopheles mosquito bites on this wooden table, it has no feeling, right? Feeling of pain or suffering or anything. So when it bites me, I feel that pain. So what is the difference? How come?
Why do we feel pain in the table?
The suk dirora, suk sore dirora. So jadu kala suk sore jura.
이 치료 비조제 때문에
Dila choro mindus.
이 치료 비조제 때문에 그냥 사도를 받으니 고쳐시 그때 칠 때는 쉬어라. 맞지 좀 해야 돼. 주차 소식 더 제일 되는 쉬어라. 다들 강가 던체 입장에는 던조대로 소자바이나 그 소화되는 문제라 마자대로 시작을 소자바이나 소화되는 게 제가 같아요.
So he said like, why this table, both of us are made up of atoms, right? The wooden table is also made up of atoms and our body is also made up of atoms. But why do we feel pain and why this table has no feeling when the mosquito bites?
So when we talk about feeling, that's really getting to having a brain. It is really in our brain that we feel something.
Tatanda chore jura, chorwa le di khari da dewa shigur lawena leba da de dures. Leba yongin di ani chorgure le jura di shigures.
Simple organisms that are just one cell, they can sense their environment, but we don't believe that they feel pain or happiness or things like that.
Tatanda ngaju tabung kyangde riking jura, dinde riking baina chorwa yo resine chorwa de du le jura.
So when the mosquito bites you, your cell senses that it has been damaged, and it sends that damage signal through nerves, through your body, up your arm, up into your brain, and it is only through your brain that you can feel that pain.
And then
your brain might send a message back down, move your arm, and go away like that.
And lebe mal da khari tangu urlana laba yugu chile jora ko yutanglan en kerasu tutan so jaw da laba ko yutangu doas.
And those nerve cells traveling from all parts of our body go up in our spine to get to our brain.
Tatanda onza di call rulana gap chido gabri de padu ligi res kyungba de bado.
So if you've ever known somebody who perhaps got injured and they broke their spine and they can't move, say, their legs anymore, they also can't feel if a mosquito bites their leg because the communication signal has been broken.
Tanashi yama nisu dre di ko chadulan jungba juni chadures de chawaina ta dabgyon shoni an kangba la khari chungu me di choro di ling mares ne badila.
The cell that the mosquito bites still senses the damage, but we don't feel the pain because the feeling happens in our brain.
Tatanda de la tabung di gal so jadura de ne nisu di tabung di chorgu res maso jasa di ne marachu da di ya ligyo mar choro de du choro di khol ligyo launa leba da tewa chagi ras di ne su di ya ligyo mar choro de du di chorgu mares ne badil.
There's a big interest in the United States, at least, about meditation controlling pain because we have too many people taking medicines like opium, morphine, those kinds of drugs which have bad effects.
Tangazo nupcho ari do cha shawainas an naza di ma chaya chedu nam yuni khari pheji orlana me morphine the opium la din pheji chigures an thanda khari share la na thanda gom gi juni naza di nasu de ani tangjin share la ani di thar gures.
It's super interesting. They can put machine sort of connections and watch how your brain is functioning.
Tandangol chik tembajish main tenzu tangyur la ora nasu chal main tenzu ani shugen duja tigures cheza ani gom di ya sigures di nasu chai di an tandangaju di gom gi juni lebe gi chele khandi duwe me di onzo thuje tenzu kan tagures.
Someone who's trained in meditation, when they go into a certain state, their brain activity changes dramatically.
Diladu gom nyamle yabu chinge dinde ri imbaina Quran suita lo di tuje di gani tagros and lebe chele di gyo chumbu shu du ya thongu yores.
And Western doctors are clearly realizing we don't understand everything about the brain.
Cheza ani nupcho gi member denzo thanda ngara zo lebe ko la changma chasangwa ji shingi yo mares Quran zu imbaine.
And are becoming interested in meditation as a form of pain control.
Cheza ta nasu di ma chae jora di ani thanda gom gi juni cha tu dula de indigal thunan chimbu ti yores member de zo.
So I want you all to be teaching me how to meditate before I go.
Cheza ta nga pha malo ni la ani khiran zo nga la bom dilabro ches. Seso khadu dube me di haku yores ra. So when did the first living organism originate? So how did it originate?
When we talked about that timeline, we think life started 3.8 billion years ago as a very small life form, very primitive.
Ta nganzo thudik digala shadu ta du gala thuzo sharos dila du cheso ki ta thangbo dikhadu chungru la aina nganzo gi therbum sum cheggela shaires dila du ani thanda di ani tab deu shuji kenguji shagures.
And you remember when we passed our squiggles along how quickly the shape changed just trying to copy the same thing down a row of 10 desks.
And tengi dos kiranzo thanda remove inde churi ya juru sthisa thamungela and di kiranzo pe shula ni thangma chi gel chik tangdu gala thangbo gochuwa ni chin ma du gyo shu droswas.
So over this time that's even hard to understand, we've gone from this very simple kinds of life to many different kinds of life and many complicated kinds of life.
Dila do ani tab deu chi ni ta mangbu thuju ringbu shu jna la ta gyo du yore la di mazo she khabu chhagu yores thuju ringbu shu gor yores.
It's 11:30. We should make sure everyone please has their ideas for us and meet back at 3. We're going to try one session.
Ta tharing roga chi gi sarwa changma roga ni su mes ani thanda kiran ju gi thanda joshi ni juya shela parse ma phingela gengele lo phiro chis ani parsing gi jela shela parsing jela ani sida chik chwa yin sa